Welcome to Reading Bear. Today, we've got a story where OP gets visited by the so-called HOA police clipboards, reflective vests, the whole act, and they try to bully their way into running his property. I live on a weird little slice of land that sits behind a subdivision with an HOA. My parcel is technically a flag lot. My house and shop are behind the houses that face the main street. And my driveway is a skinny strip that runs along the side of the subdivision's entrance. When I bought the place, the easement across the first 50 feet of the driveway was recorded on the plat. The easement is the only part that touches their world. My deed mentions nothing about the HOA. No CC, ours. No architectural committee, no dues. I'm not a member. When the title company slid me the closing folder, I asked twice, just to be sure. They pointed at the line that said property is not subject to any homeowners association declarations. The HOA wasn't much of a problem at first. The road into the subdivision is wide and pretty, lined with decorative boulders and a sign with the neighborhood name in big metal letters. They like their uniforms here. Uniform mailboxes, uniform tree types, uniform house paint. I keep to myself, so the uniform thing is someone else's problem. I mow my frontage, keep my driveway clear, and haul the usual lumber and project junk back to my shop. On weekends, I help my brother with small construction jobs. So you'll see a beat-up flatbed trailer parked in my yard sometimes. That's the extent of my chaos. The new HOA board president moved in and things changed. I don't know what she did for a living, but she had the energy of a person who color codes her spice rack and wants everyone else to do it too. I'll call her the president, because if I write Karen, half of you will tap out. She started with emails. Somehow she got my address from a neighbor who does neighborhood watch. The emails had subject lines like, friendly reminder about community standards. Inside were paragraphs about street parking, trash bins facing the same direction, speed limits inside the subdivision, gate codes for contractors, and exterior changes requiring architectural review. Every sentence implied that I was included in we. I replied once, politely, that I wasn't part of the HOA and that my deed wasn't under their CC, ours. I attached the page from my title packet. She didn't respond to that one. Then I got paper. Bright yellow courtesy notices tucked in my fence rails at the corner where my driveway meets their entrance. One said, no overnight street parking. It was stuck on my gate. Another said, all contractors must check in at guard station. I looked up and realized they'd put a folding table at the entrance with a couple of people in reflective vests, the kind you buy in a pack of 2 next to the jumper cables. There was no guard station. It was a Costco table with a clipboard. The first time I met the HOA police, they were peering into my trailer. My brother and I had just finished unloading sheet goods and were strapping down empty racks. A woman with a vest, a hat that looked suspiciously like a park ranger knockoff, and a little badge-shaped patch that said compliance stood by the gate, clicking a pen. She had a man with her who looked like he regretted all his life choices. Gate code, she said like it was a greeting. I don't have a gate code, I said. This is my gate. It's policy, she said. She pointed to a sheet on her clipboard that said something about all properties behind the entrance being part of the community and needing to provide access for compliance checks. She said policy like it carried the weight of law. I'm not part of your HOA, I said. I kept it calm. I held up my phone and showed her a PDF of the deed again. See the bit that says not subject to declarations? She didn't even glance. Then we'll need your schedule of exterior work, she said. Nothing can be changed without architectural approval. We've had complaints about unapproved construction vehicles. I looked at my brother. He looked at me. We both tried not to laugh. I told her I'd email the board president again. Then I asked them to step away from the trailer and stop leaning over my fence. That should have been it. You'd think a person sees not in the HOA and takes the day off. Instead, the board ratcheted things up. A week later, I got an actual letter on HOA letterhead. It wasn't certified, but it used all the serious words. Notice of violation. Failure to comply. Fines may be assessed. It listed 3 violations. 1. Outdoor storage visible from the street. Flatbed trailer with construction debris. 2. Unauthorized exterior modifications. Trenching near drainage swale without approval. 3. Failure to provide contractor access details and gate code. I stared at the list for a long time, then I laughed. Point 2 was the best. The trenching was me clearing the drainage ditch that runs along my driveway. The ditch technically sits inside my property line. The subdivision benefits from it because it carries runoff away from their pretty boulders and the flower beds under the sign. Historically, I've kept it clean because if it backs up, my driveway floods. I'd spent a weekend in hot weather digging silt and pulling invasive plants. The HOA billed that as a violation. I figured it was time to act like a grown-up. So I called a real grown-up, a county sheriff's deputy I'd met at a neighborhood crime prevention meeting. I explained what was going on. He didn't give legal advice, but he did say something that stuck with me. Private associations can make rules for their members. They can't enforce those rules on non-members, and they definitely can't pretend to be law enforcement. If somebody in a vest is trying to order you around on your own land, that's a problem. He recommended 2 practical things. 1, send a Notice of Non-Association letter to the board. Return receipt requested, with copies of my deed and plat, clearly stating that I'm not subject to their CCRs and that their agents aren't authorized to enter my property. 2, if anyone trespassed or tried to act under color of law, call the sheriff. I wrote the letter. I kept it simple. It said, I'm not subject to the HOA. Your documents don't encumber my parcel. Please cease sending notices, and your volunteers are not authorized to enter. I attached the friendly daylight photos of the stake and flag that mark my property line next to their entrance sign. I used the green return receipt card at the post office so someone would have to sign. I kept a copy. I thought that would be the end. I waited a week. The green card came back with a scribble that looked like the president's signature. For 2 days, silence. Then the HOA security arrived. They weren't police. They were a private security company in matching polos, the type that does patrols for shopping centers. I know how those arrangements work. They can enforce rules on private property they're hired to patrol. They can't block a public road or act like cops. The HOA had them parked by my driveway, lights blinking, the whole production. As I tried to pull in, one of the guards waved me down. He said, I needed to move my truck to my garage because no overnight street parking. He pointed at the yellow courtesy notice taped to my gate again, like it was a warrant. Where did you get the idea that my driveway is your street? I asked. He gestured toward the president, who stood back a little like a director on a set. It's all common area, she said. Everything behind the entrance is part of the community. We've adopted a policy to manage access. That was the moment my petty brain lit up. You want policy? Great. Let's do policy. I told her I would follow her instructions exactly as she'd written them in her letter. I would provide a schedule for exterior work. I would stop all exterior changes until I got architectural approval. I would require all contractors to check in with security and get escorted to my property. I said it plainly. She nodded like a teacher who had finally broken a stubborn student. Good, she said. We'll get you on the agenda for the next meeting. In the meantime, no more trenching. No more exterior alterations. No more unauthorized vehicles. I said, no problem. Then I closed my gate. My brother asked what on earth I was doing. I told him to watch. First, I sent an email labeled, Exterior Work Schedule. The HOA had demanded it. I listed every single thing I could think of that might qualify as exterior work, down to moving my trash bins and changing the batteries in my driveway sensor. I gave times like between sunrise and noon, and as needed if it rains. I copied the security company and asked for confirmation that they would escort all deliveries to my property. I asked whether they staffed the gate at all hours, since deliveries arrive when they arrive. I asked for the name of the person who would approve exterior changes, and I attached the precise language from their letter that said to stop all exterior work pending approval. Second, I stopped doing anything outside that could possibly be called exterior work. The ditch? I left it alone. The HOA's letter said stop. That ditch runs along both sides of my driveway, and even though it's on my land, their runoff ends up in it. I had cleared half of it the weekend before. The half next to their sign was due next. The weeds and silt stayed. They grew and grew. Every time I walked by, I whispered, per your letter. Third, I held them to their contractor check-in policy. My brother had a job scheduled for a fence project in my yard. He arrived at dawn with 2 guys and a rental auger. The security table wasn't staffed at dawn, so the crew sat at the entrance for an hour waiting for someone in a vest to appear. When a volunteer finally showed up with a coffee, she tried to wave them through. I had already emailed that all entries required escort and gate code per policy. They didn't have a gate code, they had my phone number. The volunteer called the board president, who called the security company. Security couldn't respond for another 30 minutes. The crew waited. When the guard showed up, he asked where the common area work order was. I replied that the work was on my land, but per HOA policy, it required escort. He shrugged and drove his patrol car at walking speed down the 200 feet of my driveway like he was guiding a presidential motorcade. He watched 3 guys unload an auger and stood there until I told him they were finished. Then he escorted them out. It took an extra 2 hours. Every single time a package was due, I emailed security. I included order numbers for things like screws and gloves. I asked them to confirm they would escort the driver to my gate. The drivers hated it. The guards hated it more. They had to leave the entrance, drive the length of my driveway, sit while I signed an electronic pad, and then creep back. When a grocery delivery arrived at an unpredictable time, they got a flurry of calls, and I got a grumpy escort. I thanked them and reminded them it was their policy. Meanwhile, the ditch was turning into a green shag rug. We had a couple of hard rains that would normally slide right down the cleared section. The uncleared side started to pool. It didn't flood my driveway because of the half I'd cleared earlier, but the pool backed up toward the HOA's flower bed and their metal neighborhood sign. The decorative bark floated. A small pond formed behind their boulders. Mosquitoes sent out party invitations. A volunteer compliance patrol showed up again with clipboards. They took photos. They tried to put a bright yellow notice on my fence that said, "Maintain landscape to community standard." I pulled it off and handed it back through the fence. I reminded them the letter from their board said to stop exterior work pending approval. The 2 volunteers looked at each other, and then at my email history printed on their clipboard. They left. The board president started sending me snappier emails. She said I was being difficult. She said I was causing more work than necessary. She said I didn't need an escort for every package, obviously. I replied with her own words, copied and pasted, bolded, with the date on the letter. All contractors and deliveries must check in with security and be escorted. I added a screenshot of the guard escorting a package truck, just for fun. When she wrote, "Don't be ridiculous," I replied with, "I'm complying." During this, I kept the sheriff looped in with short updates, mostly to make sure I had a paper trail. I sent him a photo of the compliance patrol vest with a bad-shaped patch. He called me back and asked if they had identified themselves as law enforcement at any point. They hadn't. They just acted like it. He told me to call dispatch if anyone tried to block my driveway or claimed authority over my property. It happened sooner than I expected. One afternoon, a security guard parked his car across my driveway while my brother was backing the flatbed trailer in. He had the lights going, and he stood with his arms crossed. He said I couldn't bring commercial vehicles onto my property without HOA approval. My brother stood in the road with a trailer at a bad angle and traffic building up behind him. I asked the guard to move. He refused. I asked twice more, quietly. He refused again and told me, "Policy." I called the sheriff. The deputy arrived quickly. He pulled in behind the trailer, turned his lights on, and walked up to the guard. No shouting, just the tone cops use when they've heard enough nonsense this week. He asked if the guard was a law enforcement officer. The guard said no. The deputy asked if the guard had been told that this driveway is private property, and the person in the truck is the property owner. The guard said it was common area. The deputy asked if he had paperwork proving that. The guard didn't. The deputy asked him to move his car. The guard made the mistake of saying something about orders from the HOA. The deputy asked for his driver's license and the name of his supervisor. It took 5 minutes. The guard moved. The deputy told me, in front of everyone, that private security cannot block a driveway on private property. He said if they did it again, it would be considered obstruction or trespass, and that the guard company would get a visit from his supervisor. The deputy spoke to my brother and waved him through. The guard stood there and stared. The board president appeared like she had been waiting in the wings. She started explaining community standards to the deputy. He listened for about 10 seconds and then asked whether my parcel is legally part of the HOA. She said it is within the community. He asked if she had documents. She didn't. He asked why her volunteers were wearing patches shaped like badges. She said it was symbolic. He asked her whether she had read the letter I mailed. She made a face like the letter had personally insulted her grandparents. He told her if her volunteers or her security tried to restrict my movements on my property again, the next conversation would be at a different level. The deputy took a quick statement from me, asked me to email him the documents I'd shown the board, and then he left. The guard drove off. The president stood and fumed. That night, she sent me an email that basically accused me of weaponizing law enforcement against my neighbors. I replied with a 2-sentence note. I'm complying with your written policies. I'll continue to comply. The ditch situation got worse. Someone from the HOA had the bright idea to rake the top of the weeds to make it look tidy. They left the roots. They also raked the decorative rocks closer to the edge. The next rain made the bank slump. The water had nowhere to go. It pooled around the base of their metal signposts. The bark chips escaped and migrated like brown boats into the road. The HOA sent me a photo of the mess with a note that said, "You must maintain your ditch." I replied with her letter again, "Stop all exterior work pending approval." I copied the sheriff for fun. I also copied the county's code enforcement email, which is public on their website. I asked the county, very politely, if there was a standard for roadside ditch maintenance and whether an HOA letter could supersede the owner's right to maintain drainage. Code enforcement responded faster than I expected. They love a ditch. They live for ditches. A man with a county truck came out, stood at the edge of my driveway, looked at the flagged property line stakes, and took 5 photos. He asked me to point to the portion I had cleared. I showed him the half that flowed like a dream. I showed him the half that the board had stopped me from finishing. He nodded. He said something about water flow and weeds, and then he left. 2 days later, the HOA got a notice from the county to abate obstruction to stormwater flow adjacent to subdivision entrance. The letter cited the section number that I can't remember because I never remember code numbers. It gave a deadline. It did not address me at all. It addressed the HOA board because it said their landscaping had contributed to the obstruction and that their volunteers had interfered with the lawful maintenance of the ditch on private property. The letter was posted with blue tape right on their metal signpost. Someone tried to peel it off. The blue tape held. The board president sent me a message that might as well have been typed in all caps. She told me I'd caused this. She told me I needed to fix the ditch right now. I replied with her letter again, the one that told me to stop all exterior work. I asked for written permission from the architectural committee to resume ditch maintenance. I asked for the names of the committee members, their scheduled review date, and any specific design standards for ditch geometry. I said I'd be happy to comply once I had approval. I copied the county on the email so they could see the board telling me to stop and then demanding I start. The county replied with a single line, "The HOA is responsible for abating the obstruction by the date specified." At this point, my compliance schedule was starting to cost me real time. Escorting deliveries meant delays. The fence project had taken an extra day. A friend who helps me with concrete had to reschedule twice because the security people weren't there when the truck showed up. I started keeping a spreadsheet. Every hour that a worker sat at the entrance waiting for an escort, I logged it. Every delivery the guards helped by crawling down my drive, I logged it. I attached the relevant email where the president had said it was mandatory. When I had a decent stack, I sent an invoice to the HOA. It wasn't huge. It was the equivalent of a couple days of labor at a fair rate and a line item for fuel burned by delays. I included line by line. Fence crew delayed 2 hours per policy escort required. Concrete truck delayed 90 minutes per policy escort required. I kept it simple and professional. They ignored it. Of course they did. That wasn't the point. The point was to show a judge. Later. I sent a second notice marked past due. I kept complying. The county deadline approached. Every morning I walked by the ditch and gave a little salute. The weeds saluted back. The HOA held a board meeting to talk about non-compliant property behind the entrance. A neighbor texted me a blurry photo of the agenda. I showed up. Open meeting means open meeting. I sat in the back quietly and listened. There was a lot of talk about safety and standards and perception. There was less talk about jurisdiction, which I would have thought might be the headline. When they moved to the ditch item, the president said they would need temporary access to my property to complete the abatement. She said they would hire a landscaper and bill me. I raised my hand and said I would be happy to allow access with prior written notice and the name of the contractor, and that I'd need them to sign a simple one-page agreement not to damage my fence or driveway. The board's lawyer, who had been quiet until now, leaned into his mic and said, "We should talk offline." You could feel the air leave the room. The next morning, the county came back with a bigger truck. They had a couple of workers and a small excavator. They had an orange permit card tucked in the dash. They didn't ask the HOA for permission because they didn't need it. The ditch is a drainage feature, and the county can clear obstructions in the right conditions, especially when a homeowner has been told to stop. They cleared the HOA's raked mess and the slumped edge near the sign. They didn't touch my side. When they finished, they left a bill with the HOA, not with me. That's when the mood shifted. The bright yellow courtesy notices stopped appearing on my fence. The volunteers stopped taking photos of my trailer. The security table disappeared in the mornings. The board president's emails moved from policy to collaboration. She said we'd gotten off on the wrong foot. She said maybe the guard escorts were overkill. She said maybe the ditch maintenance could be handled by me going forward. I replied with a simple note. Happy to resume my normal maintenance when I have written confirmation that your board rescinds the prior demand to stop all exterior work and acknowledges that my property is not part of the HOA and not subject to your policies. She didn't reply for 2 days. Then she sent an attachment titled Resolution. The resolution was a 1-page document that read like it had been dragged through a committee. It said the board acknowledged that my parcel was not subject to the HOA's CCRs, that the prior letters should be considered withdrawn and void as applied to me, that the security escort policy did not apply to my property, and that the board and its volunteers and agents would not enter my land without permission. It also said the board would cooperate with me to ensure the drainage remained functional and that the entrance area would be maintained by the HOA's landscaper. It was the adult document I'd hoped to see on day one. I saved the PDF to 3 places and printed it for my file. With the resolution in hand, I got back to living like a person who owns a piece of dirt. I cleared the rest of the ditch on a cool morning with coffee and a thermos. I moved my trailer in and out without a chaperone. I accepted packages at the gate with a wave. I put the yellow courtesy notices in a drawer as a weird souvenir. Then I filed my small claims case. This wasn't revenge, it was housekeeping. The escort delays had cost me money. My spreadsheet had dates, times, emails, and photos. The sheriff's report about the blocked driveway was short but clear. The county letter proved the ditch mess wasn't mine. My invoice had been ignored. I went to the courthouse, filled out the form, paid the small fee, and served the HOA via certified mail. The board's lawyer showed up at the hearing. He was polite. He tried to argue that I had chosen to insist on escorts. I showed the judge the letter that said, all contractors and deliveries must check in with security and be escorted. I showed the emails where I asked for clarification and was told to comply. The judge asked one question. Was his property subject to your CCRs? The lawyer said no. The judge looked at the time log and the rates and awarded me most of what I asked for, plus the filing fee. It wasn't a fortune, but it paid for the fence posts and the new blades on my mower. The day after the hearing, an older board member knocked on my gate. Not the president. He introduced himself through the slats and apologized for the mess. He said the board had gotten a little enthusiastic. I told him I appreciated the apology. He said they were reconsidering the compliance patrol program. I told him I supported the concept of volunteers picking up trash around the entrance and calling the sheriff when someone actually broke a law, like vandalism or theft. He laughed and said that sounded almost reasonable. The sheriff's deputy who responded to the driveway incident stopped by a week later while doing a patrol in the area. He asked if the situation had cooled down. I showed him the resolution and thanked him. He said, "It goes smoother when folks remember who's who." He told me the security company had gotten a call from his supervisor after that day and that their contract with the HOA had been updated. Translation: the guards were told not to play police. A couple of months passed. The board presidency changed hands. I didn't ask why. The new president sent me a short email that read like an actual neighbor wrote it. It asked whether I'd consider letting the HOA's landscaper mow the 10-foot strip next to their sign when he was already doing the entrance, so the visual line looked continuous. They offered to pay me a token amount if I preferred to do it myself. I told them I'd keep doing it because it's my ditch, and I actually like a straight edge, but that I appreciated being asked. I added one request. Please make sure the volunteers don't wear bad-shaped patches anymore. The email reply had a laughing emoji and a promise. I put a small, no-soliciting private drive sign on my gate. Nothing dramatic, just clear. The UPS guy waved. The grocery delivery stopped blocking the lane with an escort parade. The reflective vests disappeared. The boulders remained decorative. The ditch flowed like a champ. People sometimes ask me why I didn't just go nuclear at the start. Why not hire a lawyer to send a scary letter and end it? The truth is, you don't always need a lawyer to make a point. Sometimes you can get the result you want by holding people to their own words and letting natural consequences unfold. That's the whole idea behind malicious compliance. You put on a polite smile. You follow the instruction exactly as written, and you let the result teach the lesson. In this case, the lesson landed in several places at once. The board learned that their policies don't turn private security into deputies and volunteers into badge carriers. The security company learned that blocking a driveway on private property is not a fun way to meet a sheriff's deputy. The county got a neat little example to show in a slideshow about stormwater obstructions, which I hope they use every time someone thinks raking weeds is ditch maintenance. And I learned that keeping meticulous records is boring until it's not. There were funny moments I didn't expect, like the time a volunteer tried to hand me a laminated resident parking pass, and I used it as a coaster in my shop for a while because it was exactly the size of a coffee ring. Or the morning the guard escorted a package labeled hose gaskets down my driveway like it was a cash shipment. Or the HOA meeting where a guy stood up and asked why the board was paying to clean a ditch that belongs to that guy behind the sign, and an older woman shushed him and said, out loud, because we made it worse. That last one might have been the turning point. I still get the occasional email about neighborhood watch events. I still wave to most of the residents when I drive past because they're normal people who just want their place to look nice. A couple of them have stopped by to ask me about drainage and fences and where my property line actually is. I keep the stakes visible and the flagging tape fresh. I printed an extra copy of the resolution and hung it on a nail inside my gate, purely for my own satisfaction. Every once in a while, when I'm mowing and the sun's doing that end-of-day thing, I think about the guard car parked across my driveway with the lights flashing and the deputy's calm voice asking for a supervisor's name. I think about the president's email telling me to stop all exterior work, and how that sentence, just that one sentence, turned into a small pond, a county notice, and a bill the HOA had to pay. I don't feel guilty about it. I didn't set anyone up. I just stopped doing their work for them when they told me to stop. That's the cleanest version of malicious compliance there is. If you've never dealt with an HOA, you might not know how intoxicating the word policy can be for certain personalities. They'll say it in a way that makes you feel like you've broken an actual law by existing outside their spreadsheet. If you have dealt with an HOA, you know exactly the type. The person who flips a switch when given a title and a clipboard. Not every board is like that. I've heard of good ones. I've met good board members now. But when you get the clipboard brigade plus a private security company with a light bar and a willingness to help, you've got a recipe for a show. The key, at least for me, was keeping the temperature low. No screaming, no clever speeches in the street, no drama for the sake of drama. Let the paper talk. Let the ditch talk. Let the escort policy escort itself into absurdity. And when the man with an actual badge shows up, let him do his job. Here's the part people always like. What happened to the president? Nothing headline. Worthy. She didn't get hauled away or sued into oblivion. She stopped being president, and I haven't seen her in a vest or behind a clipboard since. The last time I saw her, she was walking a small dog past the entrance, and we nodded like neighbors. I like that ending. It means nobody got hurt. It means a lesson got learned. It means life went back to a normal hum, which is really all I wanted when I bought this odd little flag lot in the first place. My brother still jokes when a package arrives. Should I call for an escort? I tell him no. The sheriff already thought otherwise. And that's the whole story. If you find yourself dealing with HOA police, it helps to remember they aren't police. If they ask for your gate code and you're not in their club, you don't have to give it. If they send you a letter telling you to stop doing maintenance on your own ditch, take them at their word. If they say every contractor needs a chaperone, pull out your calendar and start scheduling chaperones. Keep your cool. Keep your records. And let gravity and water and bureaucracy do what they do. I still have one of those bright yellow courtesy notices in my shop drawer. It says, no overnight street parking, which is funny because I don't have a street. Sometimes when I'm changing the oil on my mower, I use it as a drip mat. It's the perfect size, and it reminds me that paper only has as much power as you give it. Anyway, the ditch is clear, the driveway's open, the packages arrive without a parade, and the only lights blinking at my gate now are the little solar ones I put in the gravel so the delivery drivers don't clip the corner. I didn't ask permission to install them. I also didn't need to. Anyway, thank you for watching. See you again tomorrow.